everyone. Welcome to the Adaptivist Group Expert Hour. I'm your host, Laura Larimore. I'm an associate developer here at Adaptivist, and I've got some friends with me who host the DevOps podcast, and we have a special guest with us today. So let me go around and introduce everyone. First, we have Rasmus, who's here today
Hello.
with us.
Yes, I think of myself as the Adaptivist's resident weirdo and crazy idea guy. I'm a jack of all trades. I've tried a little bit of everything. I've done DevOps consulting at the principal level. I've written, code, made products, all this stuff. So I like everything.
Yeah, Rasmus is a lot of fun. Next up, we have Matt Saunders here with us today.
Hello there. So, I think I'm another weirdo. I think, Rasmus, you're the resident one, so I'll just be like, I don't know, adjacent weirdo or something. Being a weirdo is good, I think. I'm all for that. And when I'm not being a weirdo, or maybe when I am being a weirdo, I'm the head of DevOps in the CTOs group here at the Adaptivist Group. So I kind of sit in the group looking at how everyone's doing DevOps across the group and try and make those things better. So sysadmin, Linux sysadmin by trade. Well, I shouldn't say that anymore because I'm not anymore. But going back a very long way, DevOps transformations for the last 10 or so years since that was the thing. And yes, I think I'm probably going to be a DevOps weirdo till I die.
Yeah, we appreciate all of the things that Matt and Rasmus do. They make our lives a little bit easier in development. Next up, we have Bart Zane from GitLab.
Yeah, I'll also call myself a weirdo. I love all things DevOps. I've been in solutions engineering and partnership-oriented roles for the better part of my career, and all focused on DevOps. And I have a background in the data center as well. Data center to DevOps was been kind of my career path, and I've been kind of excited for every step of the journey. So looking forward to having this discussion and chatting with you all.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one. So today we're going to talk about digital transformation. We're going to look at like how some teams are using it, things that we can overcome and things that are difficult about it, things to look forward to in transformation, and just kind of a little bit of everything about that. So first up, we're going to ask, what does transformation really mean? So Bart, you want to take this one to go with us?
Yeah, sure. So I would refer to transformation as a fundamental change or shift in a company or organization strategy. And this involves, a holistic approach, right? You look at the structure of your teams, you look at people, process, and tools, right? You're really trying to approach every angle and rethink how you approach the status quo, right? And the whole, aim or goal of undergoing a significant transformation in the way you approach things like software development or DevOps is really to adapt to shifts in the market and better achieve your goals as a company, right? So it's really all about not only the tools and the process that you undertake, but it's also about culture. And so really it's all about reshaping the way people think and the way people collaborate and work with one another across teams, right? So it's really difficult. I know, Laura, you had previously alluded to how difficult it is to get people to change. So you really need to support team members every step of the way.
Right. Yeah. We had some talk on our podcast about Gene Kim's book, Wiring the Winning Organization. I think, Rasmus, you had some thoughts on that to go along with changing and people and culture and all that stuff that's involved in transformation.
Sure. And it's also about, it's all these books. I have random ones just laying on my desk all the time, reading these things, but it's kind of like, what is transformation asked today is a weird question almost, because we've gone so long. There have been so many books. There have so many things like Phoenix Project, Unicorn Project, all these books, and they come up with the ways, and there's so many good pieces of, wow, this sounds really cool. I want to apply this. But what happens in reality, kind of like, what does transformation really mean now, or why are we still talking about it? To me, is interesting because it's like, sure, you've got like agile transformation, digital transformation, DevOps transformation. And what we end up doing, like as a consultant, is rarely ever anything like that, which is funny because we usually get hired to do, maybe we start like with these lofty goals that yes, we're going to implement like the things from these books and do cool stuff with them. And then we end up doing like a Jira cleanup, or we go and like hook up GitLab to something else, or like little individual pieces. But what to me is super important and meaningful with transformation is that you do something more holistic, that you're tying a bunch of different things together. And I liked how Gene Kim's recent book was talking about this like social circuitry being core to it all, which really is kind of like what carries culture in figuring out, okay, you have these tools, but you really need to be thinking about how people are interacting with each other atop the tools. It's not about the tools, it's about people.
Yeah, I want to riff on that a little bit. It's very tempting to see the transformation as being something that you need to do because other things are going wrong. I think we go through our careers having accepted to some degree that change is a constant thing, and new technology comes out, new ways of doing things comes out, new books come out, new techniques, and at some point we try and apply them into our own little worlds or bigger worlds, and very often discover that our worlds aren't actually big enough to make a difference. So yeah, we go off and try and sort out our social circuitry, to quote Gene Kim, as you did, Rasmus, there, but not necessarily having the scope or the momentum to be able to do that. And that's why we end up in a situation where we actually need to do a transformation. If you look at change being a constant, and we're in theory trying to continuously improve things, we're saying like a transformation is actually where, well, no, actually that isn't good enough. That's not getting us to where we need to get to. And I think that's why we start doing transformations. And that is why it's so important at a cultural level to get these things right and to make actual change at that level to empower people to do things in a different way. Fascinating.
Yeah, I think if you have a good grasp on your culture, you might could even engage in some anticipatory transformation instead of being reactionary to, oh, we've caused all these problems, let's go fix them. If you kind of keep a pulse on the people and the culture within your organization, I think sometimes you can be a little bit ahead of the curve, and that's always a good thing.
Yeah, and maybe it's a bit like steering a massive ship. I'm staying away from container analogies, Rasmus, don't provoke me. But yeah, steering a big ship, you can see if things aren't going quite right. Or maybe you can't. Maybe you need to put some structure in that lets you see things like how you're actually delivering value streams. How are you actually delivering value to your customers? How do you work out who your customers actually are? Some businesses struggle even with that. And if you don't put that stuff in right from the get-go, and you're not continually evolving that, then you're going to drift off course. And so then you end up in a situation where you need to transform. You can't just inch your way back onto course. It's got to be, no, hang on, stop all the engines. We've got to actually transform ourselves here.
Yep. Or else you hit a bridge. Like
I was just thinking of that, yeah.
Thinking of that too. I think we all were.
Sorry, Baltimore. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in keeping with the bridge analogy, so what is it that causes some transformations to fail? What makes you hit the bridge instead of being able to steer your organization in the correct direction?
Steering too late. Go on, Rasmus. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I would say it's a combination of a couple things, right? It's a lack of ownership towards outcomes. It's a lack of enforcing a change or an open collaboration between kind of the teams involved and getting towards the direction. Sometimes it's so difficult to steer a ship in the right direction once people are so set in their ways. So that's one component of it. And then what I've seen oftentimes is a lack of committed follow-up to ensuring that change is happening the way we envision it and wanted it to happen, right? So if there's not that clear follow-up, it often falls to the wayside or doesn't go the way you intend it to go, right?
Mhm.
And I think we could start quoting numbers, and all these books again also do. They will quote numbers on why transformations fail. They will quote numbers about how you should feel bad that your deploys per day aren't high enough, like they are in all these books. But the thing is, regardless of the numbers, the underlying issue just still comes back to that you're not approaching it in some sort of holistic fashion. Like, again, using us as an example, when we go out and do consultancies and so on, we end up working for a small corner of the business, and they might even like put us in an even smaller box because they only have budget to do this one little thing over here. But this one little thing over here is meant to like have a transformative effect on the whole enterprise, and that just doesn't work. You kind of have to either like reach from bottom up and like talk to a lot of people and make a big difference, or you have to have some sort of like gentle top-down approach where you're not forcing people into a box you want them to go into, but you still give them some guidance on like, here are some cool numbers and things about stuff, but to make them work, how do we get there? You have to think big picture.
Yeah, to add on what you just mentioned, I would like to add that it's important to focus on the right numbers and the right goals, right? If you're so focused on one tiny insignificant piece of your business, you're missing out on the broader overarching change, right? So it's more important to focus on the right things as you plan out transformation than it is to maybe get over pivot on metrics, for example. So you can get really focused on the number of times you deploy a day, and while developers can push more commits or they can deploy more to their target environments, that doesn't necessarily make your application better or the way you work and collaborate better, right? So it's all about focusing on the right metrics as well.
Yeah, and so I'd like to add another vector to this, which is that we've talked before about how hard it is if you're doing a transformation. You got to start somewhere, and it's a big challenge to work out which place is small enough to not be a disaster if we try this transformation and it doesn't actually work, but also big enough so that people take notice of doing that, and then you can get through that. You can figure that out and do that, and you transform this part of the business. But then you realize, yeah, it is bigger, because we're talking about, it's a cultural thing, whether you're doing it bottom up or top down. Did I do that the right way around? I think so. It's massive. And also, just because you fix one team over there to work and get their deploys up by a factor of 6 or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean that the same tricks are going to work in another team. And all that just gives you a massive blend of opaqueness, I think, when you're looking at trying to convert what you're absolutely right in saying, Rasmus, which is that we need a holistic transformation into something that applies at all levels. It's hard, and other reasons that they fail are because the ground shifts underneath you as you're doing them. People take on transformations as a year-long project or a 2-year-long project, for example, and in order to set what you're going to be doing off in the right direction, you've got to take a snapshot of how things are at that point to some degree. I'm not encouraging everyone to be waterfall about everything, but you kind of do when you're dealing with something this big. And if you're not adjusting it, just coming into something you said a few minutes ago, Bart, if you're not continually adjusting the way you do this as you go, then it's going to fail. And if you get 2 years in and you consider your transformation complete and successful, it probably looks completely different to what you thought it would like to start with. So if you then play all that back, or rewind back to the start of the project, I think it's no wonder that people try and set things in stone a bit too much and come up with various goals from a transformation. And it's only through working agilely, in an agile fashion, I don't think agilely is a word, that you discover that what you first thought you wanted to get your company back on the rails is the wrong thing. Because if you know what it was at the start, I'll pause for a breath in a minute. If you knew what it was at the start, then you would already be doing it. You wouldn't need to transform. So, yeah.
Yep. And I think going back to metrics for a moment, that really is this key thing that people miss on. Like, I think a lot of people know that they want to do metrics, and sometimes they say DORA metrics. And I had one client that was curious, like, we want to do DORA metrics, but we only have Jira and people aren't using it consistently. It's like, I mean, you can like look at when a ticket opens versus when a ticket closes and like assume that maybe that kind of deals with delivery, but you really need to make your tools consistent. You need to figure out what you truly want to measure, not just arbitrarily pick one or two things, and then go from there. You can't measure if your transformation is going anywhere unless you have some metrics to push for that. And I was reading a different Gene Kim book from a few years ago, Accelerate, which was kind of like a take on 4 years of doing these kind of DevOps service that they were doing, where they were also trying to measure culture, which is a lot trickier than DORA metrics for number of deployments per day and things like that. And they're doing these, like, I think it was Likert scales of how much do you agree with certain statements that are put together very, very cleverly. Because it's not easy to make a survey that actually is meaningful, which is where you might need to read some books or get some good examples of it. Because you can get to a point where you have this sort of like, do you know what you're doing and how well do you think you're doing it? And then over time, you keep measuring the same way. That is the key part. Because otherwise, you don't know whether your transformation is working or not if you can't, over time, measure what's changing.
Let's give Dr. Nicole Forsgren due credit for Accelerate. But yes, totally. It's, I mean, there's an old adage, you can't improve what you don't measure, which I think has been kind of set by the wayside a bit. But the reality is that we're working in complicated organizations. And so it's not straightforward to just be able to see, what is what are the metrics you should be looking at. So yeah, measure them. But even that is tricky though, because like you say, you get teams who maybe aren't working in a way that is actually directly measurable. And so before you even start measuring them, you've got to change the way that they work in some way. But yeah, you got to do it.
And that kind of touches into that people and culture thing, getting them to change the way that they work so that you can measure what they're doing. Exactly. One of the things we kind of wanted to talk about around this is when you transform, you often have to migrate not just people to the things, but you have to migrate all your things to the other things. So why is it that migrations are still so hard?
Yep, that's a good one.
Rasmus, the wizened old migrator there. It's like, oh.
Which is funny because I try to stay far, far away from migrations. It kind of gets me back to how in these books it lays out these beautiful pathways forward and uses these great analogies. Like in Winning the Wiring Organization, there's this lovely analogy I like where they're talking about restoring an old Victorian hotel, which just is get some movers in to move furniture out of the way and then get some painters in and then paint. It's like, how can that be so hard? And it goes through all these like fun experiments of how like Gene Kim is there in person, like trying to ask painters to like do things a certain way, and another person's over here asking to do things, and they finally get to like, okay, so if we use this process, then it's actually working. But then it leaves out a piece, which is the people involved, branches into gears all the time, even if you know exactly what you're going to do. When you try to do it, no plan survives contact with the enemy, so to say. So when you start saying, okay, you do it like that, you do it like that, but then suddenly you realize, oh, wait, two people on this team over here weren't actually in the conversation. They were out that day. And that's human nature. I don't know what we can do to get past that.
Yeah, I really like Rasmus's moving house analogy. I think it really applies here, right? There's so much baggage and data and applications and systems that over time accumulate more and more dust, right? And so when you brush off the dust and realize, okay, here's the full scope of everything we need to move over to our new, let's say, new cloud or new tool chain or what have you, right? It's very disruptive, and it tends to uncover a lot of unexpected issues or dependencies, right? Let's say you need to move a sofa, for example, and it doesn't fit through the doorway. same thing goes for maybe a legacy application that you're trying to transform and migrate into cloud, for example. It's going to reveal hidden complexities, technical debt, or incompatibilities with the new paradigm that need to be addressed as they come up. And so this leads to potential delays and just additional challenges as you work through the details.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in bounded contexts here. I think when we work in big organizations where maybe it isn't the Taylorist dream, and organization is a bit fluid in terms of who people work for, who they report to, who's responsible for various things. You're trying to move a sofa. And I look at this and I think, well, okay, that's fine. We can kind of. In fact, I was doing this last week, moving a sofa. No, I'm going to get angry if I think about that anymore. We got it in somehow. But if you're moving a sofa in a modern organisation, you can't take for granted. This is going to sound really weird, but it's probably going to be quite a good soundbite actually. You can't take for granted that sofa is not on fire. Or that the floor that you're walking across to move the sofa through the door is not going to fall in on you. And I'm not saying that all of our organisations are shantytown, ridiculous, falling apart houses, although probably many of them are. Anyway, but there's a whole load of stuff of context that you don't necessarily know when you're working in a big organization, which means that something that sounds so trivial as moving a sofa through a door just isn't. And then before you know it, you've got people saying, well, why have they just moved the sofa through the door? And that happens a lot. And I think it touches on things like getting people to work in a way where they can actually be confident in the decisions that they make. I'll quote Daniel Pink, where there is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If you haven't got all three of those things lined up in an organization, even in a well-orchestrated silo that you thought was doing a good job, then it's going to be hard. And so, yeah, it's important to look at the local. Again, another Gene Kim quote from the same book. I can't remember the exact quote. Rasmus, you will, of course, because you're better at remembering these things than I am. Around giving people localized context to make decisions, and that's how you actually start to get things done.
Yep.
And it feels really alien, even though it's the most simple thing in the world.
Yep. And I will throw in a thing that probably will sound a little consultanty, but is also maybe a little insightful, in that oftentimes we kind of like pitch doing a discovery segment first to figure out, hey, is the data in like your Jira actually in a good shape? Or should you look at maybe transforming the data, cut down some custom fields and all that before you migrate? Or do you migrate first and then like merge in some other instances and all that kind of stuff? We pitch that most typically because it's kind of needed. But here's the thing. And customers don't necessarily like the idea of first paying for discovery and then do the work. But we don't like selling discoveries alone either. We don't like it either. We've just kind of learned over time that unless you really know what's going on, it's really hard to get started and get a big idea of like, how big is this thing? Like, how many couches are there? Are the lights on?
Yeah. I mean, in my own life, I've moved probably 8 or 9 times in my adult life. There are so many things that you go in the garage and you look back there in that corner and you're like, why do I still have this? And it's kind of the same thing with your Jira instance or whatever you're working out of. You'll be like, why am I still using that workflow? Can I do this differently or change this so I don't have to migrate it somewhere else? Because you don't want to keep carrying the same boxes around and around and around that aren't things that are useful. So yeah, I think that the discovery things make a lot of sense. I don't think anyone really likes them though on either side.
Yeah, one thing that we do at GitLab in the discovery is we actually try to identify, what the problems are and how they can be solved, and what is that timeline to success, right? In terms of the things that any company would need to do in order to do DevOps better, right? So the discovery to us is all about uncovering, what the problems are, how ugly do they get, and how do we go solve it together, and what's that roadmap to getting these problems fixed. So that's what I would I would recommend is leverage discovery as that scoping exercise to understand how hairy the problems get.
Yeah, and the discovery, it can be really hairy. And actually, I think you need to have quite a lot of bottle when you're doing a transformation, you're doing a migration. Once you've done all this discovery and you've found all those horrible old boxes in the corner of the loft, and you maybe don't know who owns them or if anybody will ever need them again, but you're too scared to throw them away, you've got to have the courage of your convictions to go off and push forward and do that. And I think a lot of people find that hard, especially when in the short and medium term, just maintaining the status quo and just carrying on, keeping calm and carrying on is so much easier. You don't want to be the person who sticks your head up and says, well, actually, we're gonna chuck away those boxes. They're going to the tip. So
another question for you guys: what is DevX to y'all, and why is it important to you and the way you work?
I will chip in a thing I like suggesting as part of discoveries, especially around migrations, because again, nobody likes migrations. I mean, they're painful and they kind of are meant to just get you to the same place somewhere else. So what I sometimes pitch is that put a little bit of time at the end of discovery to not just figure out what you are doing, but while you're doing it, can you come with something else that can help add new functionality? So talking about like Jira and workflows and so on, have you thought about maybe making the workflows better? Like what would people enjoy? What would improve the developer experience? And can you do that as part of doing this migration? So you don't only like move the exact thing you have here over here, but you actually like transform it while you're migrating it to where it's like, oh yeah, these three workflows would actually work better in this new approach over here. And that's what our developers have been asking about for years at this point. Can we do that while we're at it?
Yeah, to your point, Rasmus, I think migrations are, a great opportunity to rethink your process. And, to me, I think we're all creatures of habit, right? So what can we do to make everyone's lives easier in terms of the steps that they need to take in order to accomplish what they need to get done, right? So what that means in the context of DevOps is how can we, introduce things like self-service and automated workflows to kind of build, test, and deploy applications. So once you introduce changes as a developer, those get automatically tested and deployed. Right? What are the things that we can do to make everyone's lives just a little bit easier, right? And save even simple things, right? Save 5-10 minutes out of someone's day. And over time, if you look at the impact that has on a team from a cohesiveness and a collaboration perspective, it does wonders, right? And just not having to constantly switch contexts and switch tools or be locked into a specific ecosystem of tools that maybe only pertains to you and your team and doesn't apply to anyone else. But getting everyone on the same page, collaborating in the same places, it does wonders. It really does. It gives a lot of benefits for not only the developers that directly work on the projects themselves, but also kind of supporting roles such as platform engineers and security professionals. So maybe one of you guys could chime in on personally how you've seen this work.
Yeah, I can riff on that a little bit. And I can do that by going a little bit more into the why. We've talked somewhat about the how. And something I get asked in a context of developer experience is, well, why is this actually important? And I think it comes back to a number of factors, such as, I think it was Mark Andreessen said that like software is eating the world now. Apologies, please don't look for that. Probably misquoted him horribly. But building software is instrumental in running so many businesses these days. Not even just tech business. It's just massive. I think that's just no argument on that. It just really is. And so the developers are basically, in this scientific world of ours, they're effectively, they're the creators. They are the artists around doing this stuff. And so we say things like, well, yes, well, we want a good developer experience just so that our precious developers don't have to waste their time. And but it's a real thing. The latency that you can add to getting stuff done, the friction you can add just by not setting them up for success, can be massive. And it's not to say that we just stop everything and work out how to make all the developers' lives easier. We can leverage this because in a lot of ways, the developers are our customers, or they are the voice of our customers. Maybe a product owner in the organization has come up with a requirement, something to do, and it's the developer who's kind of putting the creative work into making that a reality through code. So that's really important. Coming back to what you asked, Bart, how do we actually see that manifesting itself? It's something that I personally consider to be a difficult thing to do, because we are used to having these complicated systems that we're working in. Complicated, but I may even just say it's just the same as DevOps, in that we've been trying to break down silos, get people to work together, but with that added focus on refreshing things from a developer's point of view. Are people doing it well? Yes and no. I think it's still quite early in this stage, but having tools that can support changing the developer experience is really helping. So yeah, things like good CI/CD systems, good IDPs. We haven't talked about that much yet, and I'm sure Rasmus is dying to get going on that. Are all very much key, and they're the sort of things that we're seeing in as being central focal points around getting DevX done better.
Yeah, I want to chime in with the idea that it's interesting to think about how what we're transforming into has changed over time. I was in a workshop just yesterday that had these nice slides that goes between how, well, first it was agile, and then like stream programming and just like make developers more effective. And then it kind of turned into DevOps, where you're talking about getting developers and operations to talk together, even though that left out like testing and security and so on. Then came DevSecOps, and then like cloud engineering. And I loved how somebody pointed out like cloud native is kind of like just shadow IT, but we named it something prettier so people will do it. It's that's funny to me, but it's like each level is like the goalpost, what we're transforming into changes. But the one thing that's remained constant is that ultimately it is the developers writing code that take concepts and turn them into some sort of value, and all the other stuff is absolutely necessary. All this supporting groups or platforming bits and things, they're necessary. And ultimately, the closer we can get to making it as simple as possible to just write code and enjoy it, the better it is. All these other things are absolutely important. It is great to have like a cloud native expert and a platform engineer and a good security person. They all serve a role in all this. It's like all of them together are meant to build this beautiful platform on which you can then put the main bulk of your effort in actually writing code that solves problems. So that's where I think we're going. We are almost there with the whole like platform engineering, internal developer platforms, or DevOps platforms, and so on, which is an exciting place to be in. And that's why I'm excited to be part of a product team that's trying to help build such a product more on top of something like Backstage. So tools matter, but they're around the periphery. We're trying to build this beautiful environment for developers to do their best work in and have a great experience doing it.
Yeah, so you touched upon something I like to refer to as developer flow, right? So how can we avoid all the pitfalls of getting stuck in dependency hell and trying to figure out which version of Node you need to be running, for example, or or debugging, error codes, right? We want to get to a place where we can focus on our best work, right? And that place comes from removing the friction that often comes with, not having appropriate IDPs set up to support your developers in place, or not having the right, again, tools and supporting ecosystem around, the developer team. So, I personally will say that, I spend a lot of my time debugging things that I shouldn't have to debug because somebody didn't help me, with getting, the right dependency set up, or just, didn't set up appropriate test cases. So a lot of us talk about implementing test-driven development, and I think that's super important, right? So that you understand what the key constraints are, what you're testing for, what you're looking to validate, and then as a developer, I just go and I build my code and test against those use cases, right? So love your comment there. I think it's hugely important, right, to focus on how we can get everyone into a better flow, right, and working on things they love to work on.
You guys are like speaking my language. I could like daydream about what this life would be like, where I could just paint and not have to worry about all these other things that come into my day. So in terms of when you're trying to transform, and the tools are important, and you're trying to get everyone to move and do the things, and I like what you said about DevX, and like when you make things easier for the developers, I think it makes it easier for them to want to move too. Because they're like, oh, we're moving to this thing and we get to do this. This will be cool. So what are some anti-patterns that we see when we're working on transformation engagements?
So I will say that one of the biggest ones is to kind of like focus on too little, but there's an asterisk, because my example of like, if one business unit of a large enterprise asks us to work on this little teeny tiny thing, but oh yeah, this thing is supposed to help transform the entire enterprise, that's not a great way to start. But at the same time, counterintuitively, one of the best approaches to transformation is to work on one team, which sounds oxymoronic, but it has been repeatedly tried out that if you can kind of take a team and pull them out of existing workflow and process and limitations and so on, and just let them focus on trying to do things the right way, while they get some special treatment and being able to bypass a bunch of things, it works great with like greenfield projects, new things. So you can just try all these new cool tools and DevX and so on to do the thing. This one team can prove it and do something neat. Well, like they can actually make a new product this way and prove that, yes, these things work. And then you can say, okay, now we can try that with 3 more teams. But this team can keep going. And they've kind of laid the foundation for the new way of doing things. And then you just slowly start pulling the rest of the enterprise in that direction. Again, with the whole like the honey approach, with make it look really cool, and people will slowly migrate themselves. So the anti-pattern there is that you can somehow just, start small without the big picture and just imagine that it'll magically transform everything on its own.
So just to add on that, Rasmus, I think what you mentioned is, sometimes the scope is too small, or you get scope creep, and you're focusing on things that don't really make an impact. So I like to say, really a problem with some transformations I've seen are really when you don't understand the root causes of your problems, right? And you don't understand what to focus on. So sometimes you have companies or organizations where leadership blames people when really it's a process challenge, or people blame process when it's really a tools challenge, right? So it's all about focusing on the things that are going to make the most impact to the way people work and collaborate. And so you really have to get holistic here. You can't focus yourself on one tiny piece of the way an organization works. You really have to look at all angles and understand what's driving what's going to drive the most impact, right?
I want to pull together 2 things. One that you just said, Bart, about making impact, and also something interesting you just said, Rasmus, about giving teams a pass to kind of just go off and do things in the way that they want to do them. I think that's a great way to figure out how to fix things. But it also points at another anti-pattern, which is that like, well, so we're going to let these teams just kind of do what they like. Why weren't they just doing that anyway? What is it about the bureaucracy of the organization that makes it feel that it needs to do all these other things that are getting in people's way? And so an anti-pattern there is that you go into doing a transformation thinking that the problem is one thing, as you just said, Bart, and it's something else. And it's a great way of making those problems actually visible, making them actually visible of what the problem actually really are, where you just send off this team to just go off and do some stuff. And people will be saying, oh no, everything's going to catch fire and we're going to be bankrupt because of all this bureaucracy. I don't know, security, compliance, governance, is it those things? And actually pushing the envelope a bit more and letting people go off and try and get their stuff done and then fixing all the rest of the stuff behind you as you go can be a great way of getting that transformation actually going, I think.
Yep, this is a big thing because patterns become ingrained even beyond the point where they made any sense whatsoever. You end up in a position where you think you can't do a thing because you're not doing a thing. Like on our little podcast, we were just, doing podcasty things. And then one day somebody got the idea, hey, we should ask Gene Kim if he wanted to come on it. And we did. And he did. But I don't think, like, for a long time, it's like, but why in the world should we do that? That can't possibly ever work. So we just did it, and it worked. Mm-hmm. And there are so many things like that where we are holding ourselves back from just doing cool things. And there are systems where it becomes so tightly ingrained that it just becomes frustrating. Like going through airport security, which I was doing yesterday, and I forgot I had a brand new flask with water in it. And guess what? I got in trouble because we are still thinking that somehow having water in a bottle is a security risk. But it's just become such an accepted thing. Will we ever reassess it? Will we ever try to have a pilot group come through security that's not a painful experience?
And that's why earlier what we were talking about with the numbers and the metrics, and Bart was like, well, you got to look at the right numbers. But you do have to look at the right numbers, like what really matters in terms of what's going on. But I think you also have to kind of think like a sociologist and a little bit tell a story with the numbers that may not be so obvious. Like we have this many deploys a day, but that might not be the whole story. It may not be as obvious as we're not deploying enough. It may be something a little bit different that's under the surface there. And I think sometimes when you can bring a little bit of storytelling into your metrics, that's when you can kind of really get at what those problems are that you're wanting to address, but that you may not know how.
Yeah, you tell a story. And you're right. It absolutely is. It's psychological. You look at the way that people analyze things and how you make decisions. We're all terrible at it. Absolutely terrible. And the only way we can get better, well, not the only way, but a good way of getting better is to talk this stuff out. You find common ground to talk to people who don't necessarily talk your own language, using whatever definition of language you want there, to work out what that common ground is, and talk things through so that you can make better decisions. And then you start to understand things like all the biases that you're bringing, by setting your arguments. I'm making this sound a bit more controversial than I actually mean. Setting your arguments against somebody else's, and go from there. It's talking, and it's figuring this stuff out. It's having that holistic view where you want to change an outcome of something. And then, just teasing out all the myriad of aspects that there are to it. It's not easy.
So I want to throw one more thing in on metrics that we've kind of already talked about, but since we were talking about anti-patterns, not having the right metrics is really it. But I liked how Bart brought up test-driven development. And I'm going to pitch one of my crazy ideas in here, because one step up from test-driven development is behavior-driven development, which, those unaware, is where you kind of write your use cases up front. And then you eventually turn those into automated tests, just like test-driven development. You write the tests first, and then you write the code. And I wonder if you write the right metrics up front, like define the right metrics and the way by which you capture them, the tests, like surveys about DORA or cultural things you can get through Likert scales and all that kind of stuff, could you start a transformation that way and just run your tests over time and see how your transformation is going? I think that would be neat. There's technology. We have all these neat toys and up and coming things that might help us do these things, including Matt's favorite topic.
Yes. So a lot of people would say, well, we could probably use AI to do that, right? So what is the impact of AI on modern technology at the moment and on transformations in specifics?
It's an interesting time for AI because no matter what the problem is, and I'm going to sound like an old cynic, no matter what the problem is right now, the answer is AI. More realistically, we're starting to see some excellent uses of AI in the software that we use. So, for example, metrics again. Let's talk about that. Or no, not. Well, we can talk about that in a minute. But I'm going to use an example from monitoring. So, a lot of what we said kind of revolves around setting up good metrics, good thresholds, and working out how we get towards those things. And we can talk about things like, well, if you set a metric, then obviously as soon as everyone knows what the metric is, then you can probably game it in some way to make sure you pass it by the letter, but not in the spirit. I think we're starting to see some uses of AI which are helping us out there. So if that's in terms of getting, for example, in monitoring, we say we want a certain percentage of uptime. Well, it's one of the DORA metrics, of course. Getting granularity and nuance into those numbers, which you can use in an appropriate way to drive a transformation, is one of the ways which I see AI starting to work there. We've obviously got AI helping us to write code already, not necessarily writing the code, but giving you suggestions of how to do that. And again, it's removing friction from developers. Maybe a developer is working in a language which is not his first language, a programming language. I mean, not speaking language in this case. And so you're getting good tools that are helping us to do things like that. It's all removing friction. It's increasing the developer experience. It's not handing control over to the machines because it's just suggesting, right? It's like, I think you want to write this like this. So there's a couple of examples.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. I think it's important to not only understand how AI can accelerate software development, but it's also important to understand the impacts from a security and compliance perspective, right? So it's not only about shipping more code, quicker, right? It's all about understanding the impact, right, and putting in controls in place so that you're not shipping a bunch of garbage code that AI has given you, right? I like to refer to the old adage, garbage in, garbage out, right? I think AI is increasingly more and more effective, but we just need to be careful about how we implement, how we put checks and quality gates on the code we're getting from AI. So it's really important to take the holistic approach and not just look at the volume of code that you can generate, but also the code quality and how it fits into other initiatives like security, right? How secure is the code that you're pushing, and what does it look like from a compliance perspective? Are you taking open source code that's been fed through an LLM and maybe output it in a different form and dropping that into your enterprise code, or what are you doing, right? What's the source of the code that you're getting?
Mm-hmm.
So I have another crazy idea here. It's going to link back to a little bit how earlier I was talking about like the different eras of transformation and all that. Like I think we're arriving at platform engineering and the initial place where we have like AI assisted coding, but the developers are still running the AIs and they're still the ones doing the main creative work. But when you're thinking about something like test-driven development and behavior-driven development, and you start talking about writing your values in the abstract. Like, I want to do X. And then normally that becomes a BDD definition. Then you turn that into TDD definitions. And then you write some code that satisfies the TDD, that satisfies the BDD, and then you're done. I think we can do that for a number of years now, enhanced by AI, and do really cool things, especially with platform engineering, setting up this whole support system that just focuses everything to just maximize the possibility of getting creativity into code. But I wonder if we are going to be drifting more and more towards writing the definitions for stuff like BDD and TDD. And at some point, will we go beyond this coming era of platform engineering and AI-assisted coding and go to the next thing, where we're beginning with AI being as fallible as it is today? It's going to get better. I wonder if we'll get to the point where you start really focusing on just writing the BDD and the TDD, and then the AI fills in the blank because you have tests to validate it, and you have smart enough people to go in there and look at the edge cases and test it and validate it and so on. I almost wonder if business analysts are going to make a comeback and take away developers' jobs.
So one thing we're doing with GitLab is we're looking at use cases beyond just AI assisted code completion, and we're looking at things like test case generation through our product called Duo. Right, we're looking at root cause analysis through AI to help developers debug what's wrong with their CI pipeline. So we're looking at it holistically, and we're not just applying it to code completion. We're looking at things like you mentioned, or use cases like you mentioned, Rasmus, like test-driven development. So, we were taking the approach of trying to inject generative AI into every piece of the SDLC. And we've seen a lot of success with this approach, right? Because a lot of the times, you're not only going to be focused on writing code, but you're also looking at, for example, ramping up on a different service within your code base. So you need help with understanding what goes into that specific service, for example, or method or class or object. So we're looking at, again, I think, a total of 16 to 17 different use cases to apply generative AI into the SDLC.
This has been fascinating. So we have a few questions. We're going to move to some questions now, and we'll answer those. So we have one from Mark that says, in the spirit of removing latency from developer work, what do you think is preferable? A more complicated system that has everything in one place, or multiple simpler systems but require context switching?
Yeah, I'll take this one. We prefer the platform approach at GitLab, right? We think that having one platform where you have a single permissions model, a single source of truth, and a single place for all types of stakeholders to collaborate and interact with one another, be it product management, project management, developers, operations folks, and InfoSec. We believe that having one place where each team is really going to be focused on a set of core modules or use cases within the platform is the best approach. It really, again, increases visibility to everyone on what each individual stakeholder is working on and responsible for. And it reduces friction, right? When you put everyone in the same place and you give them clear boundaries and separation of concerns, it actually lends to a better process and better time to value in terms of how quick developers are shipping code or responding to customer requests that then get fed to product management, that then goes back into the developer feedback loop, right? So that there's inner loop to outer loop, right, of feedback when it pertains to software development. So we take the platform approach. We've seen it be very successful for companies that we've worked with and partnered with to introduce this concept of platform engineering.
I'd like to agree entirely. I'd like to not pull apart, but focus in on something that Mark said in the question, which is the implication that a system with everything in one place needs to be more complicated. So do you want a complicated system that has everything in one place, or do you want multiple systems? I think clearly you want one place. Surely that's what everyone wants. But I think we screw it up. We put things all in one place and don't always consider the actual needs of the users and the personas of the people who are using this. I mean, from a compliance, governance, all sorts of reasons, it makes more sense to have everything in one place. but clearly we also mess it up and we don't get it right. So yeah, Mark, you've asked, should we have A or B? My answer would be A.5. Yeah. So what we miss is we'll often get a budget, perhaps, to consolidate things down. So you've got 7 systems, maybe 3 more coming because your company buys another company and they've got different systems. And to merge all those things together is simple. To merge them all together in a way that makes sense for the people who are actually using it is not. And yeah, bearing in mind the time we've got left, I would just say, yes, that's a big challenge.
And I'll take one more rag at it, also saying that kind of like a hybrid option in between. It depends a little bit what you use and what size you are, because a large enterprise, they probably will, as you say, have all kinds of tools and fragmentation and so on, at which point you probably would be well off having something like Backstage or other IDPs like it that are like general purpose and can just integrate with all the different things and show you what's going on. But then Backstage itself doesn't do anything, and it's not necessarily complicated. All the tools that it integrates with do the complication, and you just pull like a view into the call, which helps you get started, helps you figure out what's going on, helps you onboard and all those things. So that's a good way to start. Now, in some cases, you may be working largely within a suite like Atlassian or GitLab, where if you already have all the tools in one place, great. And there's some degree also of the ability to connect out, like with Atlassian DevOps, or they have Compass going on, and GitLab has integrations with all the kinds of things out there. So you can make it work. It really depends on where you're at. If you're like, you look like everything exploded because of how crazy your tool usage is, you need to shrink it down with something that can help like get you the overview. But if you're already in a place where you have one thing that does mostly everything, then you're in a good place. Like, stick with that, do what you can, integrate whatever else you need, just be open towards it and figure out what both your internal users and your external users need.
Right. Yeah, I like that answer. It depends.
It always just depends. Yeah.
So the other question we have is from a LinkedIn user. It says, "Why is it always consultants doing transformations?"
Well, I'll take a stab at this one. I think the reason why you need to bring someone in from the outside is because they get a clearer view of the system as a whole, and they also understand the why for change. Right? If you're set in your ways, you're doing the thing you've always been told to do day in, day out, you're not going to have a propensity or willingness to initiate change on your own. Right? So it usually you need somebody from the outside to help you understand and assess what things that you can do overall to kind of help you work more effectively and just be more productive in the way you approach your problems.
I think this is a great spot where there's another wonderful oxymoron example, and I'll use Backstage as an example again because I like playing with it. Backstage, as the way Spotify developed it, they open sourced it. Internally, it was a bunch of different teams contributing plugins, so they made it their own because they knew what they were doing internally, and they just it turned into a product. When we as consultants get in somewhere, you kind of have to help people do that. But the real case really is the people that do the work have a say in it, and they do it. Mm-hmm. So it isn't so much that consultants are the better one to do it. It's just that sometimes when you're not like a Spotify or something where you have this great internal culture and organization, sometimes you need to have that external kick, especially if you're having trouble convincing higher up management to let you do something, which leads into the next question pretty well.
Yeah. Let's see. There's another question that said, "What is the best approach, top down or bottom up?" This one comes from GoPaul.
Both.
Yes.
So I think it has.
You got to start at the top. But go on, Mark.
I think it has to be informed. Whether it's a bottom up or top down approach, it has to be coordinated, right? If it's a top down approach, you need to have the influence and opinions of the people who are boots on the ground valued and respected and injected into the decision-making process, right? You can't make decisions in isolation of one or the other, right? And if it's a bottom-up approach, you need to understand how this tool, be it Backstage or any other tool that you recommend to implement, how it's going to impact the top brass's bottom line, right? So it's a combination of both. Whatever way you take, right? You need to make sure you have the informed opinion of the other side. So that's how I would address that question.
And this leads back to the whole, like, how would you implement something like Backstage? You need it implemented internally from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, you need the support from the top down and the guidance to figure out how you do it right, rather than let everybody just go off and do their own thing and have shadow IT go crazy. So ideally, you have like executive sponsorship and support from some really smart people, and maybe you also have somebody has gathered all these metrics and things and figured out what you're doing, and they figured, okay, our like golden tool chains would be X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C. So we're going to like encourage these. We're going to allow for more resources for anybody who wants to work on these, but the work needs to be done from bottom up.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. So that kind of wraps us up for today. And I wanted to let everybody kind of give a little last bit of information you'd like to give, or statement, or something you'd like to say. So we'll start with you, Rasmus, since you were just talking, and we'll kind of just go around.
Like wrap up on transformation?
Yeah, whatever last thought you want to leave everybody with.
Last thoughts. Listen to your people and do metrics really well. That's kind of the thing for me.
Embrace the weirdos. We're all weirdos. Embrace the weirdos top down. Transformation. It's a multifaceted thing. It always has been. I think just stay pure in what you think you want to achieve from these things, and open all the doors that you need to let people get it done.
So my 2 cents, right? Change is hard and transformation is tough, and so there's no silver bullet or magic pill that you can take and change things overnight. It has to be a coordinated effort that really it takes support from everyone to make it work, right? So I think that's the key, right? Is collaborating with everyone involved to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction.
Right. My favorite thing, all the people matter. So I appreciate you coming on with us, Bart. That was a really good conversation. I appreciate you guys from our podcast, DevOps Decrypted. You can catch it on our LinkedIn and join us, listen to us. We would love to have you as a guest. That's it for us today at the Adaptivist Group. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.